Who could have imagined that I'd be reborn, and reborn to a week before that night when Eric confessed to his first love. The night they rekindled their sweet romance, I died on a cold operating table. Waking abruptly from a nightmare, drenched in cold sweat, I clutched my racing heart and looked at the man sleeping beside me. I never thought I'd be reborn a week before my death. I clearly remember the day I died, a massive crash, roaring flames, the cold operating table. But none of that compared to the despair in my heart. It was our 4-year anniversary, and a friend secretly told me Eric had booked a famous couple's restaurant, and had even bought a diamond ring. I eagerly anticipated his proposal, and arrived at the scene early to surprise him. But I didn't know that was the beginning of my nightmare. I watched him kiss another woman tenderly, and put a ring on her finger. That woman was his first love, Nina. I saw them together at a hotel, and my phone rang with Eric's apologetic voice. "Working late tonight, won't be coming back." Disoriented, I drove away with teary eyes, only to lose control and crash into a semi-truck. The night they rekindled their sweet romance, I died on a cold operating table. Turning to look at Eric, the man I had loved throughout my youth, he was as handsome as ever. But now, my heart was just cold and broken. I didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning, Eric tried to give me his usual goodbye kiss, but I avoided it. "Let's break up." The moment I said it, I felt a huge sense of relief. Eric looked surprised for a split second, then calmly asked, "Why so sudden? What happened?" He looked at me quizzically as his phone kept ringing non-stop. I spotted the caller ID, Nina. He squeezed my shoulder and told me we'd talk later, before hurriedly leaving. Without any hesitation, I packed all my things and returned to my luxurious apartment. I didn't regret loving Eric. He was my entire youth and heartbeat. But I won't love him anymore. I'm going to remove him from my heart piece by piece. Eric, the successful entrepreneur, had no idea what was behind his success. I had been the dutiful daughter who broke with her family for him. My dad, tough but soft-hearted, had secretly helped him a lot. Always arrogant and self-assured, he took me for granted, and that might have made him think he could control everything, even reconciling with his first love behind my back. Looking back, my parents were right. Some people you can share hardship with but not wealth. I lost this game. Thinking about it, I called home and heard my mom's tearful voice, which made my heart ache. "Come back, Selena. Your dad and I can take care of you forever." What have I been doing these past years? How could I make my loving family so heartbroken? I couldn't even imagine their pain when they heard of my death, losing their child. I promised my father I'd help him with the family business. I returned to a circle Eric could never hope to reach. As the only daughter of K Group, I was born with a silver spoon. It was evening when my phone rang again. I glanced at it. Eric must have finished coaxing Nina, and had time to deal with my situation. I smiled, blocked him, and began reviewing the bidding documents brought by my assistant. My only solace was never giving up my career for Eric. Years of experience made me proficient at handling issues. I was still the Selena my parents could be proud of. After a few days of work, I attended the bidding conference as a representative of K Group. This time, I was in charge. I knew Eric would be there too, but I could face him without a flicker of emotion. However, he lost his composure in public, staring at me with shock he couldn't hide. Eric had those deep, soulful eyes which used to reflect me. They were what I loved the most. But when they mirrored different emotions, I realized his no different from anyone else. The bidding started. I smiled and announced without another glance at him. The results would be revealed in a few days. In the meantime, my father planned a banquet to announce my appointment as the general manager of K Group. I happily agreed. This was the life that truly belonged to me. What I didn't expect was that the organizer invited Eric as well. Dressed in a designer gown, I descended the grand staircase, aware of the admiring gazes and spotting Eric and Nina among the crowd. Bringing someone to a social event like this meant something significant. I shook my head slightly and moved to my designated spot. After making my appearance, I began meeting my father's friends. Networking was exhausting, but building connections provided a sense of security. Finally, with a chance to rest, I entered my private lounge, only to be grabbed around the waist. The sudden closeness of his warmth nearly made me scream. In the past, being close to Eric always made me shiver, but now it just scared me. Confidently, he looked at me, seemingly certain I would fall for him again. I looked up at the man who used to be so familiar to me and said, "Eric, you don't belong here." His smile faltered, and his eyes turned red with anger, almost gritting his teeth. "Selena, why didn't you tell me anything?" I placed a hand on his chest and pushed him away forcefully. Caught off guard, he stepped back, his face showing hurt. I lowered my gaze and said, "I didn't think it was necessary before, and now it's even less so." "Eric, don't forget, we're already broken up. Eric looked at me intently, softly saying, stop being angry, Selena. You love me so much. How could you leave me? Love him so much? Yes. I once thought I would always love him. This time, after being reborn, we're separated by the chasm of life and death. I won't turn back. I looked at him and said slowly and clearly, let's just say I was too foolish before. From now on, I'm Selena and we have nothing to do with each other. Eric's face changed drastically as if he had sustained a severe blow, staggering backward. Just then, the door to the lounge opened. My mom saw Eric and me confronting each other. She didn't seem surprised, saying softly, Mike's son is here. You've been in a bad mood lately. Let him take you to unwind. Before I could speak, an exaggerated roar of a motorcycle sounded outside. Through the window, I saw a tall, handsome man get off a flashy motorcycle and casually toss his helmet to the valet. With everyone watching, George walked straight up to me as if no one else were there. He stretched out his hand and smiled confidently. Selena, welcome back. Behind George, Eric's face turned paler by the second. As I stood in front of George's motorcycle, I felt dazed. How did I end up leaving with him? George, the son of my family's friend Mike, and my childhood playmate. He was always a troublemaker, doing all sorts of reckless things. A few years ago, around the time I left home chasing after Eric, he left the country to become a freelance photographer. I rarely heard from him these past years. Usually, I only got a few of his photos showing which country he visited or the scenery he photographed. Occasionally, there'd be blurry portraits of people. George patted the backseat of the motorcycle and tossed me a helmet. Gonna hop on or what? I pointed at my high heels and formal dress. You sure? Such a hassle. George jumped off, immediately undoing his jacket. The next second, he reached over, wrapping his arm around my waist, bringing us so close it made my heart race. I was startled, tilting my head slightly back. I could see the stubble on his chin. His breath was both unfamiliar and familiar. It wasn't just me who had changed over the years. He had too. He was more mature and attractive now. Before I could push him away, George had already tied his jacket around my waist and then stepped back with an innocent smile. Selena, your waist is still so slim. What maturity, what attraction. It must have been my illusion. Shut up. I glared at him and obediently sat on the bike. Spending time with George was my parents' idea. If that made them feel better, I'd go along with it. The motorcycle shot off quickly, the wind blowing past my neck. This almost flying-like sensation made me understand immediately why some people love this sport. My heart felt lighter, but gradually, I felt something off. A near-instinctive fear washed over me, like cold sea water seeping into my limbs, making me shiver. Unknowingly, George had driven us near the place where I had my car accident. George finally stopped at the foot of a hill nearby. We had just passed through that stretch of road. Even so, I was drenched in a cold sweat. We reached the top, where the view was broad and the stars enchanting. But he noticed my discomfort immediately. His deep eyes looked at me as if seeing into my heart. Selena, what's really going on? I knew he wasn't just asking about now, or rather, not just about now. I suddenly felt an urge. This thing had been burdening me for too long. If there was someone I could confide in. I have a friend. I told George the story as if it was about a friend. George was silent for a while, then asked hoarsely, did your friend ever think about revenge? I nodded frankly, yes. He suddenly laughed, reaching out to ruffle my hair. My Selena hasn't changed much. She's still that silly girl. I realized something was wrong. George held my hand. Don't worry. I'm here with you. You've helped me clean up so many messes since we were kids. Now it's my turn to repay you. At that moment, I gave up explaining. I figured George already knew Eric had betrayed me. By the time we returned, I was calm again. Just as I was about to close the door, George slid in. By the time I reacted, he had already shut the door. George looked at me innocently. I just got back to the country and haven't found a place to stay yet. I'm going to shower, I'm exhausted. He then headed straight to the bathroom. I shook my head, unable to help but smile. His personality seemed unchanged. I ordered takeout, and not long after, the doorbell rang. As I opened the door, I realized it wasn't the delivery person. Eric was standing outside. He looked exhausted, like he'd been running around for a long time. Yeah, dealing with his company stuff while placating his first love must be tiring, huh? Selena, I came to explain, he started. I took a step back and gave a polite smile. Mr. Eric, I'm not interested in your affairs. There's no need to explain anything to me. Perhaps shocked by my distant address, Eric took a desperate step forward just as the bathroom door opened. I watched in disbelief as George walked out, with just a towel around his waist. Seeing Eric, he didn't avoid him, but instead narrowed his eyes and smiled. "Isn't it a bit late to disturb us?" Eric left with a pale face. I looked helplessly at George. Why cause such misunderstandings? George suddenly stepped closer. I could almost smell the faint mix of his body temperature and the shower gel, my favorite freesia scent. The air quickly grew warm, with an undercurrent of tension. He whispered, "What if I say, I hope it's not a misunderstanding?" My heart skipped a beat. When I looked up, his expression was sincere, looking at me seriously, as if awaiting an answer. The doorbell rang again, and I turned my head quickly. The takeout had arrived. George let out a sound that could only be described as disappointed. I, on the other hand, was relieved and almost ran away. Next, George sprawled out on my sofa, eating the takeout, and smiling at me with a thoughtful look. "I have an idea. Wanna hear it?" George was different from me. He was used to being free and spontaneous. But this time, I didn't refute him after hearing his idea. I took a deep breath. "Okay, but let me plan it." He shrugged and snorted, which meant he agreed. I looked up at the calendar. That day was coming soon. The day I died in a car accident and saw Eric betray me. When that day came, I made sure to wear the same clothes, though my feelings had completely changed. I didn't contact George, knowing he'd be in and out of my life after that day. I needed to face Eric and my past self alone. I knew clearly that if I couldn't get past this hurdle, I wouldn't be able to truly reborn. I would live in a nightmare forever. I arrived early outside the restaurant, and unexpectedly saw Nina already there. She was pacing around as if trying to find a good angle. Just like last time, I received a message from a friend. Soon, Eric arrived as well, looking less confident than before. They entered the restaurant, and Nina said something to Eric with a smile. Suddenly, her expression stiffened, and soon she looked tearful and pitiful. She took out a ring and handed it to Eric. Instead of taking it, Eric tried to leave. Nina stood up unsteadily, and Eric supported her as they walked towards the hotel next door. Something seemed different from before. I had a bold guess in my mind. I stood up abruptly and saw Nina kiss Eric, and he did not refuse her. I closed my eyes and erased the chaotic emotions from my mind. Even though I knew Nina wanted me to see this, Eric still didn't reject her. Eric's words, "I'm working late tonight, won't be back," were true. I had no more hesitation and stepped forward. I smiled slightly as Eric looked at me in panic. "No need to explain, right?" Eric opened his mouth, but said nothing. "Eric, I used to chase after your shining self, ignoring my own worth. Now I know you weren't that dazzling. It's just that my eyes had a sparkle when I looked at you." My gaze swept over both of them. "I wish you both a happy life and never bother me again. Let all those past moments, sweet or hurtful, stay out of my dreams," I said softly. After speaking, I turned to leave, but Eric grabbed my hand firmly. I couldn't break free. Then, a force pulled his arm away, and George stepped in front to protect me. I looked up at his back, feeling an inexplicable sense of comfort. "If you're breaking up, do it with some dignity. Otherwise, it's a shame for this sister here who's gone through so much," George said. Eric's face darkened to the extreme. George threw a document at Eric and spoke coldly to Nina. "You looked down on Eric for being poor before and abandoned him to go abroad. Last year your family went bankrupt, and you found out Eric was successful, so you wanted him back." Nina's face changed drastically. George took my hand. "You could do all sorts of things, but making Selena this upset was crossing the line." I looked up blankly at George. Had he been busy with this all this time? He looked at me, his eyes sparkling like stars. "It's settled. Let's go home." I held his hand back and smiled. "All right." Before leaving, I looked back at Eric. He stood there stiffly, like a weathered statue, crumbling away bit by bit. This time, when George drove me past that road, I no longer felt afraid. When he stopped, I realized we weren't at my apartment. We were at my parents' home. The garden was decorated with lights and filled with roses, creating a beautiful scene every girl would love. George confessed to me, with his parents and my parents all present. I looked at him and couldn't believe that the naughty kid from back then had grown up like this. I hadn't figured out my feelings for him yet, but saw the hopeful looks on my parents' faces. I nodded and agreed. George hugged me and spun me around several times, until I laughed and patted him to put me down. He packed his things and moved into my apartment, saying it was to cultivate our relationship. It seemed nice. George and I grew up together, we're well matched, and we have our family's blessings. The previous project was nearing its end, and I didn't follow up on it. My assistant told me Eric's company got the project, which didn't surprise me much. Although my father helped him a lot, Eric was indeed outstanding and capable. I took over the charity department of M Group directly. The upcoming event required me and my colleagues to go to a remote charity school in the mountains. George said he wanted to gather inspiration and insisted on going with me. I couldn't refuse him, so I agreed. Not long after we arrived, it started raining in the mountains. At first, we thought it would end in 2 days, but it rained continuously for a week. The conditions in the mountains were limited, and we stayed at a halfway up inn. We received a notification that there might be a natural disaster, and we needed to evacuate quickly. Just then, an accident occurred. When the landslide began, George pulled me to run, but it was too late. "If this keeps up, we'll be in real trouble," George said quickly. "Listen to me. Whatever happens next, just run. Don't look back." I suddenly had a bad premonition. The next second, George suddenly pushed me out. The rescuers took me to safety. It was just a short distance, and I was saved, but I watched him get buried in the dirt. The rain finally stopped. I stayed here day and night, just wanting to get news about George as soon as possible. The mountain roads were blocked, and transportation was inconvenient. I didn't expect the first person to arrive would be Eric. I had no idea how he got here. He brought the latest search equipment, making the rescue work much faster. Eric didn't say much, just stayed silently not far from me. Most of the time, he also joined the rescue efforts. Seeing him so worn out, I handed him a cup of hot water and said, "Thanks." Eric's eyes showed a hint of pain. In a hoarse voice, he said, "Selena, if I said I never meant to hurt you, would you believe me?" I whispered, "Does it matter now?" A bitter smile appeared on his lips. "I was too arrogant. I always thought I lost the spark with you, and that's why I couldn't resist Nina's temptation. But I didn't realize you had become a habit, like breathing." I sighed and stood up. "Eric, it's all in the past." He lowered his head, and I seemed to hear a sob. "Selena, I can't move on." At that moment, news came from not far away that they found George. I rushed over immediately. George was unconscious. A helicopter took him to the hospital. After a consultation, Uncle Mike decided to send him abroad for treatment. I followed. George had a head injury. He had surgery. The doctors said things looked grim, and he might not wake up. I stayed by his bedside, praying for a miracle for him to wake up. But one day after I finished eating and came back, I saw a blonde woman by George's bed. With her sexy curls and a red low-cut dress, she looked very striking. She was touching George's face intimately. It seemed that George hadn't been lacking female company abroad. For some reason, I felt a bit stifled inside and turned to leave. She saw me, sat up straight, looking like she knew what was going on. "So, it's you." I turned back and approached. I found out her name was Rebecca. She met George a few years ago while traveling in Africa. She was being harassed by thugs then, and George saved her. And then we had a wonderful time together. "I've never met a man as nice as George," Rebecca said with a nostalgic expression. I glared at George. If he were awake, he would definitely be knocked out by my stare. But he always had someone in mind. "What?" I absent-mindedly asked. Rebecca fell silent. I finally looked at her. She lifted her hair and gave a charming smile. "Do you want to see something?" I followed her to a house. Compared to Rebecca's vibrant appearance, the decor was overly plain. She pulled out a box, took out a book and a photo. When I saw the photo, I almost held my breath. It was a photo of George and me from high school graduation. He had his arm around me, but I looked impatient trying to shake him off. Time had frozen there. Touching the photo, I was silent for a long time. The edges were yellowed, but it was well preserved. Whoever kept it must have done so with great care. "If it weren't for his injury, you and I might never have met," Rebecca said, her lips curving slightly, still looking nostalgic. "Girl, you make me really jealous." I took the photo back to the hospital. Suddenly, I thought of calling Emily. I asked why she wanted me and George together. "Silly child, you were so focused on chasing Eric. Everyone, but you saw George's feelings for you. Your Uncle Mike and I knew years ago." I was taken aback, bit my lip, unable to speak. "After you got with Eric, George went abroad. He hadn't returned for years, until I called him this time. He didn't hesitate to come back. When I got back to the ward, George was still lying there quietly. Memories surged. Many things I thought I had forgotten were actually deeply remembered. All those times he wanted to say something but didn't, and the way he looked at me. In the end, he left without saying anything. Was it all just to fulfill my happiness? Thinking about it, I fell asleep by his bedside, holding his hand. His hand was not as warm as before but still so large. It could wrap around my entire hand. When I woke up, I was lying on the bed. George was gone. Just as I panicked, worried he had an accident, a nurse pushed him in a wheelchair. George still had that lazy demeanor. Weakly, he said, "You finally woke up. You sure can sleep. Who's the patient here, you or me?" My tears uncontrollably streamed down. George immediately panicked, and the nurse wisely left. I threw myself into his arms. George hurriedly caught me. "Don't cry. I'm fine. See, Rebecca was here," I said, watching him closely for any change in expression. George immediately became wary. "What did she say?" "She said you two had a wonderful time, and she'd never met a man as nice as you." George rubbed his forehead in frustration. "Wait, nothing happened between us. The African savannah is just desolate. There's nothing wonderful about it." I looked at him without speaking. Gradually, George's face lit up with joy. "Selena, are you jealous?" He held me tightly. "Great. Now I need to figure out how to celebrate us being together." I froze, realizing he knew all along. All my compromises and adjustments, he was aware. He knew but never said anything. It made me feel even worse inside. George and I went back home. Eric had someone reach out to me, saying he wanted to meet. I thought for a bit and then agreed. When I saw him again, after a few months, I was shocked. He looked so haggard, like all his energy had been drained from him. The Eric I knew, full of confidence, was gone. "Selena, while you were gone, I had a dream." His voice was hoarse, like he was in extreme pain. "Just like this time, you saw me with Nina, then you drove away, and got into a car accident." Even though Eric kept his head down, I saw tears slipping through his fingers. All those painful days and nights I endured, now it was his turn. Whether intentional or not, I believed he truly regretted it. At that moment, I felt a sense of relief. "I've been having this dream for a while, Selena. Tell me it's not true, right?" Eric's eyes were red, looking at me pleadingly. I smiled and shook my head. "It doesn't matter anymore, Eric." I watched his face turn dark, and I knew that look all too well. It was the look of lost hope. Eric closed his eyes briefly. "Do you think I want you back, just for your money and status?" He cautiously asked. "If I gave you everything, including the company we started together, would you come back to me?" I didn't respond. If I cared about those things, I wouldn't have defied my family to start from scratch with him back then. I sighed, looking at this familiar yet strange face. "No need. I've started a new life." After speaking, I waved to someone behind him. Eric turned and saw George waiting outside impatiently. His face turned pale. I didn't say anything else, and after paying the bill, I left. As soon as I stepped outside, George tightly held my hand. "I know this great Japanese place. Want to go?" I smiled. "Sure." When we got home that night, George covered my eyes and said he had a surprise. When he let go, I saw balloons and roses just like those in my garden that day. I instantly understood what George meant. I felt a warmth in my eyes. What did I do to deserve this? "It's not about the past. I'm confessing again," George said, then knelt down. He pulled out a ring from his pocket. "Selena, would you be with me? I promise to protect you and never let you be hurt." I didn't speak or move. George looked up at me, nervous. I glanced at the ring. "Is this just a confession?" I thought it was a proposal. George's eyes lit up with excitement. He grabbed my hand and slid the ring on. "Selena, are you agreeing to marry me?" "No." I felt annoyed, fiddling with the ring, but he lifted me up. He whispered in my ear, "Selena, you don't know how happy I am. I've waited so long for this day." I was stunned, and tears began to fall. George panicked and started kissing away my tears, moving down until he kissed my lips. In that extremely passionate kiss, I let myself go. Coming to, we were already on the sofa. "You missed out, and I'll make it up to you." George's voice was low and hoarse. "Tonight, it's just you and me, Selena." All these gestures, this seriousness, this caution, I never had with Eric. George doubled down on them for me. I slowly let myself be immersed in his tenderness, feeling his care. The days with George were incredibly joyous, like returning to carefree times. But I knew this carefree life had a cost, one that George bore for me. I suddenly wanted to see the vast grasslands Rebecca and George often talked about. After living a disciplined life for so many years, I wanted to let loose before returning to work. Without hesitation, George agreed. He never opposed my requests. Even my mom found it too much. At the airport, right before boarding, I noticed a suspicious figure. A woman with sunglasses and a hat kept glancing our way. She seemed familiar, and just as I was recalling who she was, she suddenly rushed towards us. As she got close, she pulled out a knife. In a flash, I recognized her. It was Nina. I thought she was going to attack me, but she changed direction towards George. "Die, you ruined my life. You shouldn't live either." I watched helplessly as George was stabbed. Security arrived, subduing Nina. She kept cursing madly. With trembling hands, I checked George for injuries but found none. George looked at me awkwardly, Stop feeling me up. I'm fine. Seeing me still in a panic, he whispered, if you keep touching me like this, we'll really have a problem. I glared at him but was relieved. If he could joke, he must be okay. George pulled a box from his pocket. He looked a bit embarrassed. I was planning to. I opened it and saw rings inside. These were wedding bands, engraved with our names. I burst into laughter, but our trip to the grasslands was postponed, and we went to the police station for questioning instead. I then found out that after George exposed Nina, her father, not getting Eric's financial support, fled with the remaining funds. The debt collectors came to Nina, asking her to pay off her father's debts. She hid and suffered tremendously, believing it was all George's fault, which is why she wanted to get back at him. George held my hand as we walked out of the police station. This is karma in action. If she had borrowed money properly, Eric might have helped her, but she chose to use such underhanded methods. I pulled out my phone. There's a flight to Africa in an hour. Let's go, let's go. I can't wait to start our little adventure together. George grabbed my hand and we took off running. During this trip, George and I went to many places, retracing his steps from years before. I never imagined he had visited so many countries alone. How did he get through those lonely and desolate places all by himself? We watched wild animals roam the savannah and saw the ancient pyramids. Under the starry sky, we held each other, watching our shadows merge in the moonlight, as if compensating for what was missing in each other. When George took out the ring again, he couldn't help but laugh. I'm so tired of spoiling the surprise. I laughed as I watched him put the ring on my finger. He held my hand and gave it a solemn kiss. This time, you can't run away. I responded, I never planned to run. Shortly after we returned home, our parents started preparing the wedding. Even fearless George was a bundle of nerves the night before the wedding and went to the living room for a drink of water. I couldn't sleep either, so I went out to the balcony to catch a breeze. The cool wind felt refreshing, and the sky was full of stars. I knew it was going to be a good weather tomorrow. Looking downstairs, I saw a familiar car parked. There was a figure beside it, a tiny red dot at his fingertips flickering on and off. I wasn't sure how long he had been there. When he saw me come out, he straightened up abruptly and then, seeing George come up behind me to drape a coat over my shoulders, he bowed his head slowly. George grumbled softly, you'll see the bride tomorrow. Why are you so impatient? I stood on tiptoe and kissed him on the lips, then mischievously asked, aren't you worried? George tightened his hold on my hand. Worried about what? I've spoiled you so much that no one could ever compare to me in your eyes. I laughed, squeezing his hand, but then he picked me up in his arms. Time to sleep. Tomorrow is our big day. Our wedding was grand, and we received everyone's blessings. I could almost see how very happy my future would be. I'm grateful for the second chance that fate gave me, allowing me to find George again. Being with the right person is perfection.